Welcome to Founders Unplugged, hosted by Greg McCallum. Long-form, honest conversations with founders and entrepreneurs from around the world.
My name's Paul Hetherington. I'm a Vistage Chair, which is a global organisation that works with company CEOs, business owners on helping them improve themselves, improve their companies. It's a peer group network. It's been going for about 70 years, nearly 70 years in the US and about 35 years in the UK. I have a group in Sussex of between 2 or 3 million up to about 200 million pound companies. And we get together once a month where I get some world-class speakers in from all sorts of different sectors, from everything from recruitment to Gen Z specialists to accountants to marketing specialists, really anything that a business owner needs to help them with the business. Also, that staff come along to that session. And then in the afternoon, we work with the biggest issues that they're facing at the moment. And then I also do a couple of hours a month coaching with them. And there are all sorts of Vistage events and also a hub where they can, like a McKinsey hub, where they can access all sorts of white papers on, you name it, AI, again, recruitment, retention, that sort of stuff, anything you can think of. So that's probably the biggest thing that I work with during the week that takes up most of my time, or a lot of my time, probably about 60% of my time. I'm on a non-executive director at BRE, which is the Building Research Establishment, and that's a very exciting sector of certification and testing on building materials products, and that comes from a lifetime, really, running companies and working for companies in the building materials sector, Greg. I also chair a startup called Offshore Solar Limited, and that's a very exciting new sector. And then I work as well on a few other boards, a government board called IDAB, which is the Industrial Development Advisory Board, which helps ministers make decisions on investments from 5 million to 8 billion. And I'm also chair of Business East Sussex and work in Team East Sussex, which is trying to link companies in East Sussex with the local councils and both the district councils and the county councils, make sure that they're aware of all the different things available to them. So that's probably, and I used to do a bit of consulting in my old sector, but I don't do so much of that anymore. I haven't really got time.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it. When you say your old sector, you mean in the business materials sector? Is that
building materials? Yeah, and construction.
Okay. Yeah,
manufacturing,
great intro, and just for and manufacturing, right? Yeah, and great intro. Thank you for that. And just for context for those listening, watching, we both live in Eastbourne, so we're both in East Sussex. That's why a lot of the initiatives, and the various organisations you work for, they're in East Sussex. So that's why that's the case. So awesome. So look, that's a hugely fascinating and diverse range of things that you do, and I have a ton of questions about so much of it. But I guess let's go in orders, because of Vistage. I think people are quite familiar with Vistage these days, within our space, or at least I would encourage people to become familiar if they're not. You did a great job of explaining kind of what it does and so on. I'll put probably the link and so on to their website and more information in the description of this episode. But what drew you to them? How did you get involved with them in the first place?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question, Greg. One of my cousins, who runs a very, very successful company in the States, one of my wife's cousins, because my wife's American, she's been in it for about 25 years, and her company's grown from when she took it over from her father from about 13 or 14 million up to 100 odd million now. And a lot of that she puts down to the help as well and support and learning that she had from Vistage over that period of time. Although it was called Tech then, it's changed its name maybe about, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago in the US, maybe a little bit longer. And so in the back of my mind, I was aware of it because we had holidays together and she often mentioned it. And in the UK, I left the company that I used to run just a week or two before COVID in the start of February 2000. And I'd got a couple of 2 or 3 consulting projects, hence the name of my company, which is Hetherington International Services, which sounds like a very august body. Because
very prestigious. Yeah,
exactly. And I had a client in India, a client in China, and a couple of ones in the States. So hence that's why I set the name up. Then COVID hit, and that all went to shit in the nicest way. And so then I tried to work with a good friend of mine to buy a company out of a subsidiary out of a company, quite a large multinational company. And that went all the way along to the last knock-ins. And then their chief executive said, no, they'd rather not sell it. And then I can't quite remember whether I approached Vistage or whether they approached me. But either way, we got in touch with each other. And the rest, as they say, is history. Very, very lucky that a very august chap called Chris Hughes retired, only just retired maybe a year or so before as a Vistage Chair. And he's become in the area in Sussex, and he's become a very good friend as well since. And so it was just really good timing. Went through the whole process of training and then recruiting members during COVID, which wasn't the easiest of things ever. But now we're up at 12, 13, 14 in the group. Really excited. I only have a couple of spaces left. I'll max out at 15 or 16. And some just amazing people in the group. It's such a vast diversity of types of people, everything from an actual rocket scientist through to chief executive of the hospice, chambers of commerce, retail, manufacturing, technology, you name it, and people who think just incredibly differently. And I'm often particularly in the afternoon sessions when we address the issues that everybody is facing, I'm forever thinking, "Whoa, that's a good question. Oh my goodness, I wouldn't have thought about that." And I'm sort of a bit of an old hand guy who's run companies for 20 odd years, and it's just amazing to be a real privilege to be in their company and help work with them.
Yeah, I'm on record as saying and talking about diversity of thought a lot. And how I think that there's been a lot of confusion over the recent years about what diversity really means when we talk about the workplace, and ultimately it should mean that, in my opinion. And when you've got those diverse range of backgrounds and industries and sector experience and all that sort of stuff, I mean, yeah, it's no wonder that's so valuable, because you'll get a perspective on something that you would have never thought of, because they're coming from a very different place. And that's worth a lot. It's why I advise a lot of founders to go to like networking events for founders and things like that. You know, if you start creating a bit of a group around you early on, you know, in your entrepreneurial journey of other people in other sectors, not like the exact same vertical, the exact same business necessarily, although that can be fine too, then it can really help just problem solving and things like that, can't it?
I think you're absolutely right, Greg. And we all have our, Rolodexes in the old days in our own sectors, and certainly in the building material sectors. I was on the board of something called the Builders Merchant Federation. Fabulous. Some really, really great people. But a lot of us were very similar. And
right.
When you're dealing with people who come from the care sector or from technology, or the way that they think is so different. I think the point that you make about those diverse sectors, try and step out of the comfort zone a little bit of your sector and connect and network with different sectors. You'll find it incredibly rewarding, because people just think differently, because what's required to be successful in certain sectors is very different from other ones.
Absolutely. Yeah. And tell me a bit more about offshore solar, because I remember when we met, you were talking about that. And one of the reasons, and I might be misremembering, so forgive me, but one of the reasons that you said you were particularly excited about that was something to do with legislation recently changing to do with offshore solar as a principle. Am I remembering that right? And if I am, what's the detail on that? Because I wasn't really aware of that.
Yeah, I think it's So floating solar is quite a well-worn path, and in China and other places, it's a huge industry. But offshore, where you've got the wind and the waves in much bigger challenge, a much bigger engineering challenge. And I was very, very lucky to be approached by Sean, the two founders of Offshore Solar.
Hi, a friendly reminder to share this episode with your network, like, and subscribe. And if you are feeling really supportive, please consider reviewing the show on the podcast platform of your choice. It all really helps support what we do. Thank you. Now back to the show.
A few months ago now, to get involved with them. And it's a very, very exciting sector. Reuters and Bloomberg put it at something like 2 or 3 trillion by 2050. So you don't need much of a market share of that, Greg, to have an interesting dynamic. And one of the things where that difference is between what's already there in floating at the moment is being out in the sea, and they're going to be banning plastic out in the sea, and that's what typically floating solar is based on, and it's also just not really adding to the biodiversity, where ours is metal, and it actually adds to the biodiversity of the sea that we've got in it allows, or it enables all sorts of things to grow on it while it's out there as well. So you get biodiversity points.
Well, because of the structure, presumably, that goes into the sea. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Right, I see.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the point
right.
that, I think that you quite rightly remembered was over the next 2 or 3 years in the marine environment, plastic's going to be banned. And so that's something that we have. Okay. But it's also quite a engineering challenge, which Dawn and Sean have come up with some incredible designs for. And the first phase is it's all looking good digitally, that digitally they should cope with the winds and the tides and everything and the big waves. Then we're going to go into wave tanks. Then we've got a test that we're arranging with the I'm trying to think what the name is. The folks who are the Crown Estates, who are in charge of seas offshore for the UK, and we've got something arranged for them. And then we'll go into production, and we've already just got a vast amount of interest in amounts of megawatts once it's all tested, once it's all got its certifications, etc. Because it's looking like in early data that it could be as much as twice the power on half the space as wind, offshore wind. So you could co-locate with a wind farm or all sorts of other options that we're talking to people where power is required or sustainable power.
What's the idea though behind? I mean, what's the benefit of going to sea for solar farming versus land? Like I always assumed, like you've said, that there are a lot of challenges there. So presumably it has the opportunity to generate more electricity, but I don't fully understand how that's the case. I mean, presumably you're not going to get necessarily more sunshine, UV radiation out in the sea than you are inland. So is it that they're also going to make the most of the kinetic energy that the sea generates as well? Is that the additional benefit?
So that's a really good question, Greg. That is something that we're looking at, but that's a side issue. The biggest thing is land is unbelievably expensive. And so you've got, within the UK, you've got, if you took just the UK, but also any island or anywhere really, you've got a limited amount of space on land that you can put aside. And if you're doing solar on it, then it's not going to be building and it's not going to be agriculture. So you've got that, A, the limited space, B, by putting it in the water, you cool it, and that makes it, I think, about 10 to 12% more productive because it doesn't overheat. And also, and again, Sean are the experts on this, but because it's not at an angle, you also get another productivity benefit. But having said that, it's more expensive than just knocking up something and putting it out on a farm somewhere if you don't take account of the land cost. But in the sea, there's really unlimited space.
Yeah. Fair enough. I mean, it sounds like a logistical and engineering nightmare, but it'd be pretty cool once it's built up. We've got wind farms, haven't we, out in the sea here,
yeah.
which is always really cool to see.
Yeah, and it is a engineering conundrum and difficulty, which is why it's not been really yet resolved. But it's starting to be. We're not the only folks doing this. There's places in California, in China, whatever, that are looking at this as well. But it's going to be a very, very big source of power by 2050. That's definitely estimated by those people in the know, that it's going to be, like I say, over $1 trillion market.
Yeah. Hugely interesting. So look, let's take a bit of a step back, because I always tend to jump in like head first with stuff. On two things. First, I'd really love to get a sense of kind of your background that led up to all the things that you're doing now. If we rewind the clock a little bit, but also at some point, I think we should cover what some of these positions that you hold mean. A non-executive director, NED, what, to people who aren't in the know and know those things. Maybe let's start there, actually. Let's cover that first, and then I'd love to go back and hear a bit more about your journey. So to those that don't know, because they may even want to hire an NED at some point, what is an NED, and what is their capacity? What do they do in a business?
There's a phrase that I think almost sums it up beautifully, which is a critical friend. And it's like being a school governor is also summed up in the same way as that critical friend. And so you are there to challenge, but you're fundamentally supportive. And so that's where I come from. It's also, you're not involved. It's very much about what you don't do as much as what you do. You're not involved in the executive running of the organization. That's for the executive directors. But you are involved in challenging the results that are being achieved. Whether they're great or poor or whatever the case may be, that very much what's going on, how come. But primarily, I would say the two most important areas are governance and strategy. So that's those are the real dynamics within a NED role. For me, some people might come at it slightly differently, but it's the strategic long-term, it's understanding where the organization's going, where it wants to go, and making sure that the executive team, who get bounced around by everyday weeds and that are forever, desperately trying to make money, to perform, to do well, etc., are constantly also looking to the future, and that what they're doing today is fitting in with what they're looking to do tomorrow as well. And from a governance point of view, that they're doing the right things, that they're doing this in the right way, that they are recruiting in the right way, that they are running the organization in the right way, that the culture is what they wish it to be. Now, again, what they set out, or what the organization sets out for the culture, can be all sorts of different things for different sectors. But once that's set out, that they're doing that. But also oversight, whether that's financial, whether that's risk assessment, that those sorts of things are being considered. And it's very, very easy, and I know this for having run companies for 20 odd years. You can be sometimes so involved in the weeds, up to your neck in crocodiles, you sometimes forget you're there to drain the swamp. And to be able to, at a board meeting, either every quarter or every month or however people do it, to actually think a little bit more about what the next 3 years looks like, what the next 5 years looks like, and how this year fits in with that, how the board are themselves being trained and improved, succession planning, making sure that the chief executive's thinking, if he gets hit by a bus tomorrow, who could pick up the reins reasonably quickly? And Who are the people that he's recognizing or she's recognizing within the organization, and that's happening, so that these really important strategic actions are also happening as well as the day-to-day. And sometimes they can be the ones that really come around and bite you when you're least expecting it because you've not done it. And so I'd say those are the key areas. And depending on the organisation, if you're looking at a PLC or where the shareholding is much wider held, then you are even stronger holding the board to account. And fundamentally, a non-executive chairman is appointing and, if necessarily, letting go the chief executive of an organisation, or the board are. In a more private ownership, where the owner might have 80, 90, 100% of the organisation, they might be looking for different things. That might be it's a lonely place being the boss sometimes, and so it might be being able to be challenged in a environment where they're comfortable, like Vistage. Really, sometimes Vistage is described as the board you can't afford, where you've got a lot of people that you trust around there that are challenging you. But as an owner, you might just have one or two people that you're paying to say to you, have you thought of something else? What else you might not have thought of? And also a little bit of experience. Sometimes if I had any hair, it would be very grey. And so there's not much I haven't seen or been through, and other people very much like me. And so that's often sometimes what can appear like an absolute crisis to a owner of a business is not really. And so sometimes you can put that into perspective. When I used to run companies, especially when I ran quite a few of them in one company, and I had managing directors reporting to me, and they'd call in a bit of a flap, and it would be manufacturing. And I'd say, the first thing I'd say is, because I'd be worried, I'd not know what the crisis was. Have we killed anybody? And if they said no, because it's very dangerous manufacturing, so that's always a possibility, and that's your first worry. Have we hurt anybody? No. Are we going to continue in business tomorrow? Yes. Well, then it's a hassle. It's not a crisis. And just knowing, having been there, that those three things are a crisis. Everything else is just a hassle.
Yeah, and that's it. That's a really good way of maybe something that more people can take away from that, other than just being in that specific industry. Actually, if it's not those, at this level of extreme, take a breath. It's probably not as bad as you're imagining it to be. But as an advisor myself, not an NED, but as an advisor, I think I'm quite often asked, there's a lot of confusion by business owners and founders and so on as to what all these different positions mean, which is why it's really useful having you, I think, explain what an NED is and does. Because, there's consultants, there's advisors, there's, board advisors, and there's NEDs, and there's so many. Like, how would you explain just, to business owners, especially first time business owners, like what the key differences are between these things? Because I think it is very confusing.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good question, Greg. So I would say that a consultant is when you have a problem, or you have within your business, you don't believe that you have the skill sets to come up with the answer to what you should be doing. And so, I would say that's a consultant. And so you ask them, what should we do? They come in, look at your business, and say, this is what you should do, and then largely walk away. Some consultants stay a little bit and help with doing that, but a lot of the time they deliver a report and then walk away. And depending on how much buy-in there's been and how many people have been involved in that on the way to getting to the answer, is whether the execution happens. And there's an old phrase that I know you'll be well aware of, that second-rate strategy and first-rate execution always beats first-rate strategy and second-rate execution, because it really is about making it happen that the difference is. You can get away with all sorts of different strategies. It's in the execution where really the rubber touches the tarmac. So I think that's consult. You can have
proof's in the pudding, right?
Right. You can have a facilitator, which really is at an event, a board meeting, at all sorts of different company meetings, helping get the best out of the people who are already there. So they are coming up with the ideas, but they're just being challenged a little bit and that type of thing. You can get organizations like EOS that I think are phenomenal, entrepreneur operating system, and they help you put a process into a company and run on that process. And that can be very, very, very successful. I know a lot of my members have either EOS formally, informally within the organization, have this process of running the company. And then I would say NED is very much for the executive directors. If NEDs are getting involved under the bonnet in an organization, then that's not really their job. It's very much at a much higher level, and the challenge on the strategy and helping come up with things and this governance side of stuff and challenging them on the bigger questions at board meetings and at strategy days and things like that. So I would say those would be the different types. I think the owner of a business or a large shareholder or even a CEO of a private company, it's a lonely place, Greg. Who do you go and ask for help because everybody thinks you've got all the answers? And
it's a theme that comes up on this show time and time again. Honestly, I think probably 99.9% of our episodes we tend to touch on the loneliness aspect of entrepreneurialism, of being a founder, being a managing director, whatever it is. And I'm going to repeat myself now, but for your benefit, I think the reasons for that are mostly due to the fact that there's a lot of things that you think that you just cannot repeat to anyone in your organization,
right,
for the risk of the impact that it could have, right? If you're concerned or stressed about something that's happening in your business, you can't tell that to the vast majority of the people that work for or with you, because that's massively going to, that's going to scare them and stress them out. And despite as much as we might want to talk about transparency and organizations being fully transparent, the reality is someone has to be responsible for taking the brunt of the stress of running a company. That is the job, and that is sometimes a very thankless task. And it does mean you have to keep that secret. It's a lot like being in the Men in Black. Sometimes you'll save the day, but no one will know. It was you that did it, because if they did, then they would be terrified. So yeah, speaking with other founders or having advisors is a really important part of that, I think.
It's so true. I mean, how many founders out there, how many entrepreneurs by the skin of the teeth got their last payroll done and, right, are wondering where the next payroll's going to get sorted. You couldn't be more right in that. It's a lonely place, but also who do you go and where do you go for an unbiased view? If you're an owner, is that member of staff or is that other board member truly unbiased? Is the investor truly unbiased? So that's difficult. And then one of the things that I come across a vast amount is that imposter syndrome. And I think recently I heard Stephen Bartlett. Yeah. And recently I heard Stephen Bartlett talk about it in a most beautiful way. He was reframing it into, if you haven't got imposter syndrome, then you're not pushing yourself, rather than if you have got it, it's an issue that needs solving. And I really like that. I think,
I'm maybe of the opinion of something even a more simpler version of that, which is just to say, I think if you don't have imposter syndrome, you're most likely a bit of an arrogant arsehole. Because for me, it's indicative of the fact that imposter syndrome is essentially you saying, "Oh, I'm not sure if I'm good enough for this or if I'm doing this right." It's questioning yourself, and if you don't do that at all, that means you are so certain that everything you do is right that you're probably a bit of an arsehole. I don't think there's any two ways about it. So if you're one of those individuals as a founder, as a manager, a director, whatever, that doesn't go through that at some point, you might want to think about that. I think it's a healthy part of of a psychological makeup, which is indicative of someone who was thoughtful, reflective, probably quite empathetic. I think it's indicative of those sort of traits, in my experience, anyway.
I couldn't agree with you more, Greg. And when I'm talking to people in the recruitment phase for my Vistage group, and I say no to more people than I say yes to these days, partly because I can't have more than one lawyer, and so if a lawyer fancies coming in the group, then I don't have any space for them.
More than one lawyer anyway.
And so there's no competition. But also, those people, I have met a number of people who are exactly, I can teach everybody else what to do. I'm going to, and I'll say to them, well, if I was you, I'd join a charity and give them money. What's the point in paying what you're going to have to pay me to teach everybody else stuff? And you're not for my group, because we want people in who want to learn, who know that they don't know everything, who are a bit worried, what they don't know might catch them out somewhere, and are interested in what other people think and learning, and are on that lifelong learning journey. Those that think they know it all.
It's very difficult to know what you don't know, right? I mean, that's the problem, isn't it? It's the biggest conundrum. And as an advisor, it's something I'm always being really conscious of. I have opinions, but opinions are very different from expertise. And so I'm always very careful the way I word advice when people ask for it. First of all, I believe very deeply in the principle that we should get as much context as possible before delivering any form of advice. I think there's so much that's thrown out there these days to try and get views and clicks or whatever, that it's made hyperbolic advice just being thrown around all the time. But more than that, when I do, I think I'm quite cautious about straying into areas that A, aren't necessarily my background, but B, even if they are, to if it really is getting in the weeds on something that I haven't dealt with in a while, or I know that could have moved on since I was last involved, to make sure that that's mentioned. I think that's important because, my background is in sales and marketing, but it's a very fast-paced moving industry. I haven't picked up the phones and dialed and done cold calling and all that for 10 plus years. What I can give advice on there now has changed massively. I can say when I did it, it was like this. But in reality, I can't be ignorant to the fact that things moved on since I did it. So I think we have to be very cautious in that. And that's, I suppose, the only way we can, in some ways, mitigate for what we don't know, despite us not really knowing what we don't know.
I could not agree with you more, Greg, that one of the beauties of what I do in my daytime with Vistage is my members is from such wildly varying sectors, from garden centres to, like I say, rocket science and stuff, that I've got no idea. I don't know how you run a law firm. So very much my position is coaching. So I turn up that member, everything that member is doing is absolutely perfect unless they tell me otherwise. And so you're, going through that and challenging against their goals and just listening to what they're doing and hearing those discordant voices and asking the questions. But occasionally, because I'm a bit, old enough and ugly enough, people might say, well, what do you think? And after you go back to them with the sort of coaching answer is, what do you think that I would think? That answer. And then they just say, Paul,
sounds like a therapist.
What do you think? Yeah. And then that point, which you just mentioned,
how does that
is
make
so
you feel?
Important. Yeah, exactly. And that point that you just mentioned there is such an important one. Is first of all, I'll say, okay, do I have your permission to step out of coaching and into, mentor stroke consulting? And let me put this in context of, I'm not aware of this, or it's a while since I've done this. However, from what I have heard from you, mentioning this, have you thought about how this might work or how that might work or that might work? Just to sort of getting back into it and then jumping straight back into the coaching as quick as possible, really, because I haven't got a clue what's going on in, these sectors and the latest things. But people and you can, and also the other thing that I find with the coaching is people are amazing and they are so often leave themselves hanging short. People are so much more amazing than they give themselves credit for, even if they know that they've got a successful business and they've done really well there. I bet I don't have a member in my group that hasn't got imposter syndrome to some level or other. And they are an incredible bunch of people. And I largely say with Vistage, it's a gym rather than a hospital. So we don't take anybody, I don't take people in who've got massive issues in their organization and they're running out of cash and that sort of stuff, because the last thing that they're, going to want is us. However, business is business. And so sometimes good businesses become under difficult strains, and then we're there for them. And absolutely, we help them as much as we can in the tough times. But it is about context.
Yeah,
presumably,
I mean, presumably, if a business is undergoing stress, then they would go to like a change management or business under stresses consultancy firm or something like that in that situation, ideally, right? Yeah, that's a really, really interesting. It's a topic that I'm constantly trying to be hyper aware of. But what I've found as well is, I primarily deal with quite a lot of, I would say probably the overwhelming majority, 60-70% of the clients I work with and the founders I work with are very early stage. So sometimes as early as ideation, through to, very recently launched, just starting to generate revenue. That's a very large portion of the clients I work with. And what I find is that there's a very common theme there, which is that quite often they're the ones to come up with the solutions. Actually, it's more about the fact that what they think they should be aiming for isn't quite right. A lot of business owners, especially early on, are aiming way too far down the line because that's what they see to be, that they're meant to be doing. And actually, the short-term goals are a lot more. They're blinded to them because they're looking way past them. And it's really only when you bring those, I think, quite obvious things, and they usually turn around to me and say, "That's really obvious. Why didn't I think of that?" Not seeing the forest for the trees. That then they go, "Oh, okay, so I could do this and I can do that and I can do that." It's like, yeah, see, now you're good, right? See you later. I've done my job. I don't need to tell them then how to go about doing it, because of once the obvious has been pointed out and the sort of arrow's been pointed to the right target, the rest of the work is, they can do. For most of the time, there's very few times where I'm then asked the follow-up question of, okay, well, how do I do that? Because these are intelligent people. So they can figure the rest out. It's like you said, when you are that close to something. I heard a great quote the other day. I can't remember who it was that said it. But there are two ways of not being able to see something. One is being too far away, and the other is being too close.
I saw that. I saw that on LinkedIn the other day. I thought the same as well. I thought because these that too far away, but I think it was in a context of somebody being inside the organisation or really right up close to it. And the
CEO is the closest.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so 9 times out of 10, when I'm speaking to them, that it's the most obvious things that they need pointing out, and it's no shade to them. It's not to say that they're stupid. In fact, it's the opposite problem. It's overthinking. It's over engineering. It's really that's what it is, because you're looking at such a big picture. You're looking, but you're looking at it very, very close up, and one problem at a time. And sometimes you can miss those very obvious, simple, sometimes solutions to really big problems that are laying right there. And I think that's when individuals like us, I mean, well, I say us, like I'm cut from the same cloth as you. I would say that you probably do a lot deeper and more strategic work than me. But anyway, people similar to us sometimes step in and just be like, there you go. Just let's clear the fog away. There it is. And then now do what you do. Do what you do best. Mr. We don't need to tell you how to do it. You know how to do it. So go and do it.
But also, I think that's so important what you do there, Greg, with the founders and with startups. And it's my first foray into working with startups, other than my own, is what I've done recently with Offshore Solar, and it is a bit of a different skill set. I'm very much learning from the founders what they want to see from me, and I think what you're also doing there and what you've explained is helping them get the answer grows them.
If you are enjoying this episode and want to support the show, please subscribe with notifications turned on, and let us know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. This lets YouTube know we are doing something right. Back to the show.
and gives them more confidence. And exactly like you said, getting them just to step back and look from a little bit further back and helping them facilitate, I think, is incredibly valuable. And certainly somebody
it's also
like
about
yourself.
having the framework to, it's also about having the framework to be able to run that process again from beginning to end, because of in a startup, especially early days where it's very fast paced and especially once you get funding and all that, it's incredibly stressful, and you encounter problem after problem after problem after problem, and you can't. It's not, I don't think, a very defensible move to rely solely on an advisor every single time something comes up, or an NED or whoever, because that just isn't sustainable. So I think part of our role is to give them the tools to also assess their own situations and come up, how would Greg think? Like, that's what I want them to do, and then maybe come to me, just go, I ran through a problem. This is what I think I should do. What do you think? And now a lot of my clients who we've been working for a long time together, they'll come to me and they'll say exactly that. And they'll be like, yep, spot on. Perfect. You figured it out. Like, I want to be made redundant. I don't want to be in the, part of the business forever. Like, that isn't, I don't think, the point. Maybe not the best business decision from my perspective to do myself out of work, but I think that's a win, is when the student becomes the master. That's the whole.
Yeah, but I think even the absolute top of the top of PLC world or wherever you want to go, very best athletes have coaches. The very best business people have coaches, and so wherever you go, you're always learning, providing you're challenged to learn. And I think that's you'll always be required, but the requirements will change from coming up with the answers to helping them come up with answers, to challenging what their answers are, to then just getting them to go through the thinking.
You're absolutely right. I mean, think about it now. Some of the clients I've got were a lot more further along now. The challenges we're dealing with now are way more mature and complex than the ones we were doing before. But I guess also that kind of answers my initial question a moment ago about kind of the difference between these various different sources of external assistance you can get: consultants, advisors, NEDs, chairs, and so on. Which is that, I suppose, like you rightly pointed out earlier on, they can be a bit more one and done, sort of 3-month, 6-month, 12-month contracts. And typically once everything's up and running and things are going well, then you can say goodbye. But then the difference there with what you do is there's a lot more of a permanent sort of presence in the business, for, like you said, for that continued ongoing, much more top level strategic assistance and oversight.
It can be, but even in my...
Sorry.
Even in my Vistage group, it's not always right for somebody to be in longer than a couple of years. So for some people are in for a couple of years because they're going through major changes. They're either disposing the business, they're going through a big acquisition plan or whatever. And so a couple of years is right for them. Others, like my cousin, are in for life. They're lifers, 25 plus years. The average 10 years, I think maybe 6 years or so. And so so that it's right for different people for different lengths.
Yeah, do you know what? That reminds me of something that I also say a lot to founders when they ask me, usually about everything, like, what is the standard, right? And time again, my answer is just whatever you want it to be. Like, there's a lot of questions around, what do people do here? What should I do here? What is it most of your founders that do here? And I'm like, however you want. Like, it's your business, man. Like, just, and I think that people are so worried with, again, going back to the kind of the imposter syndrome of am I doing it the way everyone else is meant to be doing it? Am I going to be seen as imposter if I'm seen to be doing it differently? In the same way, it's like, if you want to bring someone on to help you as a coach or an NED for 6 months and say goodbye, do it. If you want to have them on for the rest of your career, do that too. It's like, there's, the whole point of a rule book is to break some rules every now and then. I think.
Absolutely, right? Yeah. We don't, nobody signs up to Vistage for a year, for 2 years, or anything like that. If they're not getting the value out of it, leave. My role every month is to make sure that people are getting a lot more out of it than they put in. If they don't, and they have a couple of months where they're not, and every quarter I check with them, what's the value you've got out, etc. Are you implementing? Because It's all right learning all sorts of things from your colleagues and from other members and from all the speakers. But if you're not implementing some of those things, you're just going to a day listening to stuff. So it's really, really important to implement. And if they're not implementing and they're not getting value, then they're better off not in the group anyway.
I remember having a chat with Vistage a couple of years ago, actually, and I came to the realization that I am most definitely unemployable these days. So I was like, do you know what? It sounds cool, but I think I would just drive whoever I was reporting to at Vistage crazy. So probably best not to do it. But I did want to ask you one brief question about it, and then I'd love to get into your journey that led up to all of this, like we said we were going to do. But one small little question in relation to the NED role, the format that a lot of this activity happens. Am I right in thinking this primarily with NEDs happens around in board meetings? So it tends to be, and again, this could be the situation where there is no right or wrong, and you kind of do it however. My understanding was generally NEDs perform their roles together. Sometimes it can be more than one NED, and it is usually in the board setting to make sure that it's officialized and that there's some record of what occurs. Is that right?
Yes, that's true. Although I also meet with the chief executive outside the board meetings to see, again, right, to help support them. And also with one of the organizations, I meet with a lot of the senior staff outside the board meeting to give me a better understanding of both the organization itself, because there's nothing quite like meeting people who are responsible for the data to understand how important the data is. But also you get a flavour for people there as well, so that when then at a board meeting they're talking about succession planning or something like that, then you've met the people and you understand, and you've got a little bit. So I guess it depends So on the organisations that are voluntary, so there's a couple of ones that are voluntary, then it's about reading the paperwork. And certainly with the government one, there's piles and piles of paperwork and coming up with the questions from there. And it's all board meeting or preparation for board meeting, and that's it. Right. But with ones where I am paid, then I like to try and give a bit more value so that I can get to have a wider understanding of the organisation and be able to be there for the chief exec to ask about other things, or to challenge on other things. But always mindful that I'm not involving myself whatsoever in the executive management of the business. That said, a non-executive director does have exactly the same responsibilities in law as a director does. So you have to take governance very seriously, because, you could be found holding the baby if you're not careful, especially as a non-executive chair, and especially in a startup. If I'm taking on a role as a chair in a startup and something goes badly wrong, then in the nicest way, the young kids might get away with, oh, well, they tried this and tried that. Whereas the law would say, well, you know better. You shouldn't have let that happen. And so one of the things I'm very keen is getting insurance with startups if I join the board.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, understandably so. Which is why it amazes me when you see some of the crazy stories, especially coming out of like the crypto space and so on, where you have some incredibly senior board members and they somehow missed everything, and it just boggles my mind. The only thing I can imagine is that for whatever reason, these board members just didn't understand what they were involved in. That's the only thing. That's the only way I can comprehend it, is that they were part of a world they didn't understand, and they just, in good faith, took what the executives were saying as gospel, basically. But it still boggles my mind. But that has made me think of just one more quick question on this topic before we do shift gears, which was about remuneration. You mentioned about the difference between some voluntary versus paid. So is it common for sometimes there being a setup? Because in the advisory world, there are kind of lots of different versions of this. You have some paid advisors, others that do pro bono work. So that's me, right? I do both paid and pro bono. But then you also have investors that also sit as on the board of advisors as well. So, and some startups will only take advisors as long as they invest. Do you have a similar sort of thing in the world of non-executive directors? Are there times where an NED will also maybe be an investor in the company, or is that a conflict of interest? What's the sort of variables there in arrangements?
Yeah, so if you take the non-executive chair role I have at Offshore Solar, I'm an investor and chair. At the BRE, it's actually a charity, and I used to be a trustee. And within charities, largely, trustees are not paid, the nature of charities. And for people who are maybe at a point in time in life where they're maybe running companies or senior executives and they're looking to become NEDs in the future, I would always recommend having a period as a trustee of a charity, to give back, because it's important to give back when you've been successful and the like. But also, it's quite easy to pick up a lot easier to pick up a trusteeship than it is a paid NED, and yet you then can learn, be trained, find out what it's all about. So that massively helps somebody for them when they step into a paid NED role. So I think largely, as far as NEDs are concerned, it's either paid within a company or it's unpaid because it's a charity and it's a...
Fair enough. Thanks for that. So
because you have liability as a director.
Rewind.
Sorry, if you are a NED, if you are a non-executive director, as opposed to a board advisor, albeit actually there are liabilities with board advisors as well, but you have the liabilities of a director. So, you really have to be remunerated to have the liability.
Right. I'm with you.
Although that said,
so like I said, I do want to rewind.
Sorry, but you have a lot of liabilities as a charity trustee as well, and you're not remunerated for that.
We're going to ask more. I'm going to ask more questions about all of the stuff you just said there, because I've got a ton. But before I do, I should point out that this is now going to be the end of part 1. So for anyone watching and listening, this is where it will end, and then part 2, which we're going to go straight into now, as of on this recording, will release in a couple of days' time on the Wednesday. So just for the benefit of the recording. So, thank you for everyone listening up till now, and then we're going to dive a bit more into what you were saying there.
Thank you for listening and/or watching. Subscribe with notifications turned on to get notified when part 2 comes out. While you wait, please join in the conversation in the comments below.